which it cannot break, and that which in its own nature is forever invisible, reveals itself by the immutability of the seasons, by the motions of planets, by the great causes of cosmic systems, by the principles of growth in all things, by the harmonies of elements, by the structure of cells, and by the mysterious formulas which by their reversal can even split the atom. Every one of these things stands as a strange lighthouse in the darkness, bearing witness to the fact that this world in which we live is forever supported and sustained by the single column of the divine will. That this will is the proof that God cannot, has not, and never will depart from his word. That this principle stands forever. So in the midst of all uncertainty, man searching for truth may detect the presence of these eternal landmarks, these principles and invariable patterns, which impel Lord Bacon to say on one occasion that it is not necessary for God to prove himself by miracles, for his commonest works are in themselves miraculous. This thought perhaps is the principle behind this concept. Certainly it is the column standing as the inevitable, visible, knowable, tangible proof to the eternal power that never ceases, never changes, and can never be destroyed.
The tower.
From this tower then also comes other thinking and other value. For this tower more or less bears witness to the power of deity. The strange intangible dragon, which is in a sense reason as universal will, gave place to radiance, which is reason as universal love. This in turn destroyed by matter this strange veil of the senses which descends over man's spiritual emotion, gradually dimming these emotions and perverting them. This in turn gives witness to the final manifestation of the invisible, to the immutable structure of a universe upon eternal foundations, and rising as a column out of the darkness. Now the great reason in power of things then further explains that Hermes has beheld the descent of the eternal into the darkness of illusion. That the darkness in the midst of which rises the column is in truth the darkness of mortal mind, which stands in the presence of the column but does not see it, does not know it, does not know how to comprehend it or to realize it. For it is only given to those whom God shall love that they shall look out into chaos and see not chaos but the rising of the great column of the Lord. The others are not given to see these things. Now the reason also explains how all this mystery came about. It explains, for example, that the divine mind within itself conjured up archetypes. These archetypes are its own thoughts. And the divine power of mind reason, reflecting upon its own nature, caused to arise within itself thought forms. These thought forms being what the modern psychologists might call the wishful thinking of the infinite. The infinite possessing within itself absolute potential, and with also the power of absolute transformation of potential into potency. The universal mind began to devise out of itself the devisement of itself. It began to project its own eternal reason into the products of reason, fashioning out of itself many patterns as though upon a potter's wheel. And each of these patterns was a magnificent, effulgent blossom of thought. Each of these patterns was a tremendous dynamic symmetry of divine idea. And the eternal mind, having gained these beautiful things within itself, having in its meditation realized that of which it was capable, and having in itself the infinite good, which it could not but wish to express through the perpetual visualization of good things. It is said in the vision that the reason fell in love with its own thought. And because it formed a partnership with its own thought, it descended out of its own nature and became one with its thought. And this descent, or this departure from its own center into the center of its own production, was the first motion. And from this came the supreme illusion, which is existence as we know it. Thus, Hermes goes on to say that illusion always arises from reason falling in love with its own thoughts. That illusion for man is the dedication of the energy of his mind to the service of the productions of that same mind. Therefore, if a man shall have a fear, and shall create a thought in which this fear is objectified as a pattern, as an impulse, as a design, causing negative attitudes to arise within him, then his reason becomes identical with his own thought. It falls in love with his own idea or archetype, unites with it, and begins to serve this idea rather than the truth. Wherever this occurs, negative habits set in, and man loses his own center, becoming the servant of thought, and forgets that every thought is a production of himself. Therefore, that the service of his thought is merely the service of a lesser part of his own nature. Forgetting this, he dedicates his life to the fulfillment of his own thoughts, and in so doing wanders further and further into space, like Dionysus, following the magic mirror held by the Titans. And when he has been lured away from the great throne of heaven, the Titans set upon Dionysus, the reasoner, and destroy him. And then they eat of his flesh. They in turn are destroyed by the thunderbolts of Zeus, and from the ashes of the Titans, containing the blood of Dionysus, was fashioned the bodies of mortal men. This is your Greek myth, and carries the same essential point. In the beginning, reason is lured into space by its own archetypal thoughts, thus establishing a pattern which maintains upon all the levels of life, and every man is lured toward chaos by his own thoughts, which he becomes enamored of, thinking them greater than the thoughts of any other man, and most of all, regarding them as greater than the thoughts of heaven. And in so doing, he sets up darkness, he sets up illusion, he sets up a mysterious falseness by which his entire future is strangely possessed and obsessed. The next point in the vision deals with another very interesting and curious thing. Having fashioned out of its own nature this mysterious symbol of the word mind, the great power takes the word and uses it as a kind of hammer, so that like the mysterious hammer of the Nordic deity Thor, this hammer is used to beat out space, to carve or cut great holes in space. And we are again reminded of the Chinese, because Tong Ku, the symbol of the divine mind personified, is given a hammer and a chisel, and is given the power to carve out holes in space. And these holes become suns and planets and worlds. And here's an interesting point that Hermes makes, namely that these are not bodies in space, but holes in space. And that what we call the solidness of a physical thing is actually a solid within a density. And the density is the true solid. Therefore, matter is not a solid in space, but a deprivation or a hole. And density, which is space itself, life itself, the divine mind itself, finds its own productions as small areas of negation within its own nature, rather than forms or structures more positive than itself. The word or the mind moving upon the great deep, upon this strange mist of matter, causes something that Hermes in the vision describes as striving. Therefore, here we have an alchemical principle of motion releasing fire. We have motion as friction. And out of the motion of the world in the form of the hammer, or in the form of the active agent, we find there emerging out of space the 7 children of friction, called by Hermes the sons of striving. And these are the 7 deities, or the 7 planetary gods. And together, these gods constitute what Hermes calls the second mind. Therefore, there is the first mind, or the reason, which is the dragon. And there is the second mind, which is composed of the 7 governors, or the 7 cosmocrophors, the objective forces of creation. These 7 governors form the demiurgus, or the second type of deity, the secondary god. And to such orders of deities would belong Zeus in the Greek order, or Jupiter in the Latin. These deities are the objectifications, the coming forth out of the darkness of cause into the great world of effects. Universal reason, the first mind, therefore operates through the second mind, which is the orderly sequence of creative bodies and worlds. And these 7 governors have their power from the great reason, which is the dragon. But they disseminate this power from themselves into the world, calling forth out of the darkness the shadowy substance of creation. These are indeed the spirits that move upon the face of the waters. These are the Elohim of Genesis. These are the Ammonian artificers of Egypt. These are the sacred vowels from whose combinations are formed the names of God.
Thanks for coming in, watching some Manly P. Hall with Kush Sessions. This is Capricious Conch. See you next episode.